I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are carrying this massive, incredibly heavy backpack.
Oh, man. I feel like I'm already carrying one, honestly.
Right, like we all are. And in this backpack is literally every single thing you care about. Your career trajectory,
Mhm.
your anxieties about your family's health,
Yeah.
even, that visceral spike of envy you felt when a peer got recognized over you, or the lingering anger from when someone just cut you off in traffic.
Oh, the traffic anger is real.
Yeah.
That goes right in the bag.
Exactly. All of it. Just jagged rocks in a bag, and you are
Yeah.
hauling it around every single minute of every single day. The sheer weight of caring so intensely about, well, everything. It's just exhausting.
It really
It's
is.
that universal human experience, right? Of anxiety, of envy, of just being weighed down by the gravity of your own life.
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely is the defining condition of modern existence.
Yeah.
We are practically programmed, both biologically and socially, to accumulate these heavy emotional attachments,
Mm-hmm.
and we just guard them with our lives.
But what if there was a way to just, take the backpack off? And I don't mean by organizing the rocks or getting cognitive behavioral therapy to cope with the rocks. I mean completely radically dropping the entire thing.
That sounds almost impossible.
It does, right? But there's this 2006 text by Diaform Buddha. It's titled, "Totally Lose the Self, Attain a State of Blissful Openness." And it basically argues this isn't just a metaphor.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, it proposes that literally erasing the self from our consciousness is an actual achievable psychological state. So our mission in this deep dive is to explore how this ancient yet modern strategy might just be the ultimate operational upgrade for modern stress.
I love that framing, an operational upgrade.
Right. We're going to examine both the profound philosophy and some surprisingly extreme practical applications laid out in this text. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to truly grasp the mechanics of what the text is suggesting, we kind of have to start with the origin of that title phrase, right? Totally lose the self, attain a state of blissful openness.
Right, because it wasn't just made up in a vacuum.
Exactly. It wasn't carefully drafted in some, quiet, isolated monastery after decades of silent meditation. The text explains that this phrase emerged from a sudden, spontaneous insight by Chanyuan Celestial Yuanye.
And just for context, when the text says celestial or cultivator, it means...
Oh, right. Yeah, in this context, a cultivator or celestial refers to someone who is actively dedicating their life to spiritual refinement.
like seeking higher states of awareness.
Exactly, seeking higher states of awareness and truth. And Yuanye's realization happened not in a temple, but actually during a visit to Niagara Falls in Canada.
I find that visual so compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Niagara Falls isn't serene. It is this overwhelming, thunderous, violent force of nature. It actually makes perfect sense as a backdrop for this kind of cognitive reset,
It really does when you think about the scale of it.
Right, like if you are standing there, feeling the mist, looking at literally millions of gallons of water rushing over that edge, you realize that a single drop of water on its own is incredibly fragile.
Very vulnerable.
Exactly, it evaporates, it gets absorbed into the dirt. But when that one drop completely loses its individual identity itself and joins that massive rushing river, it ceases to be a vulnerable drop.
Huh.
It becomes the unstoppable force of the waterfall itself.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize the mechanism at play here. The text describes this exact moment as a flash of profound spiritual insight, where Yuanye experienced the absolute pinnacle of attainment for cultivators, which is ultimate bliss.
Wow. Ultimate bliss.
Yeah. But what's fascinating here is how the text explicitly links this modern, Niagara epiphany
Yeah.
to some of the most influential spiritual frameworks in human history.
So it's pulling from multiple traditions.
Oh, absolutely. It argues that this unified field of consciousness isn't a new concept at all. It points out that Buddha Shakyamuni advocated for the complete abandonment of the self.
Right.
And that Jesus Christ implored his followers to relinquish themselves entirely.
And it connects those dots to Taoism as well, right? It brings in Laozi.
It does, yeah. It notes how Laoi's championed principles of indifference, of non-action, and specifically holding on to the one to become a model for the world.
Holding on to the one sounds a little esoteric.
It can, yeah,
Yeah.
but it essentially means aligning yourself with the Tao, the undivided, singular reality of the universe. It requires dropping the illusion that you are a separate, divided entity.
Got it. So the text is pulling all these threads together.
Exactly. It synthesizes all these distinct historical philosophies and religious foundations to prove a singular underlying neurological and psychological truth. They all converge on the absolute necessity of losing the ego.
Okay, so the core argument is that no matter what historical tradition you're looking at, the ultimate outcome of erasing the self is that specific state of blissful openness.
Precisely.
But before we can get to the bliss, we have to talk about the roadblock. We have to look at why we aren't all just, floating around in a state of eternal peace right now.
Right. Why are we all so stressed?
Exactly. And the diagnosis the text offers is incredibly blunt, isn't it?
It's extremely blunt. It states that the inability to reach ultimate bliss stems entirely from the existence of the self. It doesn't view the ego as just a nuisance, like, oh, it's annoying.
Right.
It refers to the self as a literal impediment. It calls it a devil.
A devil. That is strong language.
Yeah, the self is the devil that actively obstructs our journey to peace. And it lays down this strict, proportional law. The stronger the self, the further we drift from heaven.
Now, hold on a second. I have to push back on this on behalf of anyone listening who lives and works in the 21st century.
So go for it.
Because everything in our society demands the exact opposite. We are told from day one to build our personal brand.
Oh yeah, brand building.
Right. We are told to boost our self-esteem, to speak our truth, to advocate for ourselves. The self is probably the single most prized possession in modern culture.
It totally is.
So how does a modern person even function, let alone succeed, if they view their own identity as a devil?
It's a completely valid tension, and it really highlights the friction between modern survival and ultimate peace. We are conditioned to think that fortifying the ego is the armor we need to survive this hyper-competitive world.
Yeah, armor is a good way to put it.
But the text's underlying logic suggests that the armor is actually the cage. Think about it. When you are constantly building and defending yourself, you are in a perpetual, exhausting state of conflict with everything outside of you.
Because you always have to defend the borders.
Exactly. You are an entity at war with other entities.
So by constantly defining where I end and the rest of the world begins, I am inherently creating friction.
Precisely. The promised reward for abandoning this boundary, according to the text, is unity with heaven and humanity.
Okay.
When you lose the self, your mind and spirit ascend to a realm of supreme, ultimate bliss. You don't need the armor anymore because you've removed the target. There is no you left to be threatened or diminished.
Okay, the philosophy of ultimate bliss and unity sounds beautiful in a vacuum. But how does this actually operate when you're just trying to get through a stressful Tuesday?
Right, when reality hits.
Exactly, because philosophy is great, but let's look at the text's practical, everyday applications. It gets incredibly specific about micro-anxieties. Like, let's look at jealousy.
Cool, that's a big one.
We all know the feeling. You're scrolling on social media, you see peers who are wealthier, they have higher status, maybe they're just more talented.
Or they just went on a better vacation than you.
Exactly. And it sparks that visceral, ugly unease. We don't need to rehash why envy hurts, but how does the text actually cure it?
Well, the text mechanism for curing envy is radical. It doesn't tell you to, like, count your blessings or practice gratitude.
Which is the standard advice.
Right. Instead, it tells you to transform yourself into nothingness in your consciousness.
Yeah.
The logic is purely structural. Envy requires 2 points of reference.
Okay.
It requires the successful person, and it requires you, the baseline that is supposedly falling behind.
Yeah.
If you eradicate you from the equation, the comparison collapses completely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the other person's wealth or status is just a phenomenon happening in the universe, like a tree growing tall.
Yeah.
Without your ego acting as a competing entity, there is no suffering. You instantly achieve that state of blissful openness because the competitor has vanished.
That is a profound cognitive hack. If you aren't in the race, it literally doesn't matter who is running faster. You can just appreciate the athleticism of the runners.
Precisely.
And the text applies a similar spatial logic to personal frustration, right? Like, when you are grinding away at work, your ideals are hard to realize, and your goals just aren't being met.
Right.
The remedy isn't the modern hustle culture advice to try harder. The text advises abandoning yourself and taking a massive step back. In fact, it explicitly says to retreat so far back that you cannot even find yourself.
It's a deliberate manipulation of scale. When you are frustrated, your consciousness is pressed right up against the problem, like standing an inch away from a brick wall.
All you can see is the wall.
Exactly. All you see is the obstacle. By mentally retreating so far back that your individual identity dissolves into the background, you are suddenly looking at the entire landscape of human existence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the text points out a very specific psychological shift that happens when you execute this scale manipulation.
Yeah.
Once you step that far back, Once you retreat to the point of your own invisibility, you look back at whatever was frustrating you and you realize how completely laughable it is.
Because the perspective is so wide.
Right. The frustration just evaporates because the context is shifted so dramatically. You see your career roadblock the same way you'd view like a toddler upset about a broken crayon.
It's a total recalibration of importance. But, we need to recognize that it's one thing to let go of your own internal frustrations or your own jealousy. Those are internal battles.
Yeah, what happens when it's external?
Where the text pushes this philosophy into much deeper waters when we look at interpersonal extremes. The dynamic completely shifts when other people are actively inflicting pain on you.
When the threat is directed squarely at the ego.
Yes. It starts with insults. When others misunderstand you or when they actively mock and insult you, the biological, ego-driven reaction is immediate anger and defensiveness.
Sure, fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text provides this simple, almost physics-like rule. Abandoning the self changes the situation entirely. If there is no self present in your consciousness to defend, the insult lands on absolute nothingness.
It's just flying through empty space.
Right. It is the emotional equivalent of someone trying to punch smoke.
I can kind of wrap my head around that for, a passing insult from a stranger on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
But the text brings up a much more intense example. It tackles marital infidelity. It specifically discusses the inner turmoil caused when a spouse becomes emotionally attached to someone else.
It confronts what is arguably the deepest kind of interpersonal betrayal. And its advice does not waver or abandon the self,
Right.
but it goes further, suggesting that by observing the situation from a detached, heavenly perspective, you can lead yourself to understanding and incredibly even amusement.
Okay, stop right there.
Yeah.
I have to push back hard on this one. I am deeply intrigued by this philosophy, but that is a massive emotional leap.
It's huge.
The text is suggesting that by observing a partner's infidelity from this heavenly perspective, you can find it amusing. I think most people listening would say that sounds almost sociopathic.
Yeah.
How on earth do you bypass the profound, gut-wrenching trauma of betrayal and go straight to amusement?
It absolutely grates against every modern psychological instinct we have. To find intimate betrayal amusing sounds completely detached from human empathy.
Exactly.
But if we want to understand the text, we have to rigorously apply its logic to the absolute extreme. Why does infidelity cause trauma? Because of the possessive nature of the ego. The ego says, this person belongs to me. This promise was made to me.
But a promise was still broken. I mean, there is still an objective betrayal of trust.
True, but the text would argue that a promise is just a contract between two fragile temporary egos. If you have genuinely eradicated the self from your consciousness, if the me ceases to exist, then the entire framework of possessiveness collapses.
Okay.
You aren't dissociating as a trauma response, right? You are ascending above the framework itself.
So you aren't looking at it as a victim who has been wronged.
Exactly the opposite of a victim.
Yeah.
You are observing the drama of human relationships the way you might watch a biological documentary.
Like watching lions on the savannah.
Right. You see the predictable patterns of human desire, the fleeting attachments, the mistakes. The amusement the text mentions isn't cruel laughter. It's a gentle amusement of watching the sheer absurdity of the human condition play out without being painfully entangled in it.
It's the ultimate manifestation of detachment.
It really is.
That is a staggering level of detachment. But, I mean, if the ego is what makes us possessive of a partner, it makes sense that the same ego, scaled up, is what makes us possessive of the world around us.
Exactly.
Which perfectly bridges into the text's next focus, which is macro anxieties. Moving from intimate relationships to the heavy burdens we carry for our families and society.
Yes, the daily grind of existential worry. It starts with family. For parents, or anyone deeply worried about the health of aging parents, anxiety is essentially a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
You spend your days projecting fears about your children's safety and their future.
And the text's mechanism for finding relief here is honestly jarring. It doesn't suggest hoping for the best. To cure that worry, it says you should abandon the self and explicitly consider yourself as non-existent, or even consider yourself as dead.
Mentally simulating your own death as a parenting strategy is certainly a provocative concept.
It is, but when you break down the mechanics of it, it reminds me of playing a highly stressful, incredibly difficult video game.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Right. You're gripping the controller, your heart rate is elevated, you are terrified, your avatar is going to be destroyed. The physiological stress in your body is very real.
Oh yeah, sweaty palms, all of it.
Exactly. But if you simply put the controller down and step away from the console, the stress vanishes immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The avatar might still be on the screen, the game world is still happening, but you are no longer the one responsible for every movement.
That analogy captures it perfectly.
Hmm.
The text is pointing out that your constant worry wasn't actually keeping your family safe.
Right.
It was just an illusion of control that was torturing you.
Right.
By considering yourself non-existent, you are mentally putting the controller down. You drop the illusion of control, and the anxiety evaporates.
And then the text takes the same mechanism and applies it to the largest scale possible. And just a quick note to you listening, we are completely impartial here. We aren't endorsing political apathy or taking any sides.
Yeah.
We are strictly unpacking the text's philosophical view of global duty. The text addresses that crushing feeling of bearing responsibility for your country, your ethnicity, your political party, or your religion. It calls it the feeling of carrying the rise and fall of the world.
It's that heavy, self-important burden where you feel the fate of your ideology rests entirely on your shoulders.
Like you have to fix everything.
Right. The text argues that this, too, is a massive inflation of the ego. It suggests that if you abandon the self and view yourself as an entity who never even existed on Earth, a sudden realization hits you. You realize that your desperate attempts to control the grand historical narrative are inherently absurd.
It actually equates these grand societal struggles to playing childish games.
Because when viewed from the perspective of a cosmic observer, someone who was never born and has no stake in the outcome, all of our tribal conflicts, our fierce political maneuvering, our ideological wars.
They just look like children fighting over territory in a sandbox.
Exactly. The sandbox is temporary and the castles will eventually wash away.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture.
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the structural skeleton of the text. All of these seemingly disparate anxieties, the jealousy over a coworker, the trauma of infidelity, the frantic political worry, they all funnel down into one single absolute core terror.
The root of it all.
Right. The text leads us to the final boss of human anxiety, which is fear, and specifically the primal fear of death.
Yeah, the text lists these deeply visceral fears. The fear of starving to death, the fear of freezing, the fear of being beaten or being crushed, the fear of illness, and fascinatingly, the fear of being shamed to death.
These are the biological and social imperatives that keep the ego locked in a state of hypervigilance.
Always scanning for threats.
Exactly. The entire architecture of the self is constructed around self-preservation. It is designed to panic at the thought of its own destruction. So the question is, how do you conquer this ultimate hardwired fear?
By beating it to the punch.
Yeah.
The text says that if you can abandon yourself, death actually becomes a pleasure, which is, an incredibly wild sentence to process.
Very wild.
It argues that by mentally placing yourself in a state of death beforehand, you can calmly face various forms of physical death.
It is the ultimate preemptive strike against human suffering. Let's look at how that actually works cognitively. If you fiercely cling to your life and your identity, every potential threat is terrifying.
Because there's so much to lose.
Right. But if you consciously do the psychological work to accept your own non-existence, if you essentially mourn yourself and let the ego die while your body is still breathing, then physical death loses all of its leverage over you.
Because it can't take anything from you that you haven't already freely surrendered.
Exactly. You flip the script from frantically defending your life to simply observing it unfold. You are no longer clinging desperately to the edge of the cliff. You have chosen to let go. And in the sheer free fall of that surrender, you realize you're simply floating.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from a profound realization at a waterfall in Canada to mentally simulating our own death to cure the frustration of a traffic jam.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. And when we synthesize all of this material, the text is proposing something incredible. It's saying that selflessness isn't just a moral good. It's not about being a highly ethical person who volunteers and gives to charity.
No, it is proposing selflessness as a highly effective, incredibly pragmatic operational state. It describes the state of being as wonderful, free, ethereal, serene, and joyful.
Yeah.
It's basically an invitation to test the hypothesis that your ego isn't the shield protecting you from the world's pain. It is the very source of it.
When the self is entirely lost, you unlock that exact blissful openness that you experience looking at the rushing waters of Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
You stop being the fragile drop of water and you become the waterfall.
Beautifully said.
And the text actually ends with a very direct, simple challenge to the reader. It just says, give it a try.
It's a call to experiment with your own consciousness, really. to just observe the neurological relief of temporarily removing you from the equation of your own life.
I want to address you listening right now. Think about the absolute heaviest rock in your backpack today. The thing that is causing you the most friction.
We all have one.
Oh, definitely. Maybe it's a bitter rivalry with a peer. Maybe it's a massive project you are terrified is going to fail. Maybe it's a deep-seated fear about the current political climate. Take the text's challenge. Give it a try.
See what happens to that specific burden when the person carrying it simply ceases to exist.
I want to leave you with one final thing to chew on, building on everything we've unpacked today. If you were to successfully simulate this blissful openness today, if you step so far back that you viewed your own life as a completely detached observer, a drop of water that has surrendered entirely to the roar of the falls, someone who never even existed on Earth, what is the very first worry you would instantly drop?